Hi, my name is Kate Ingersoll, and I'm a writer and novelist from Toledo, Ohio. In this video, I'm going to talk about the lace makers a little more, particularly Emerald's story. So if you've not read the book yet and you don't want to know what happens, watch this video when you're done reading this story itself. In the previous video, I talked about Karen's story, and now it kind of tied into when I had watched the end of Hamilton, and the song that really struck me was "Who lives, who dies, who tells their story." And in the previous video, I talked about who told Karen's story. What I'd like to talk about today are the stories that I learned about slavery and the time of the Civil War in the United States. But really, when I started to research Emerald's story, I went back 200 years or more to find out how slavery began in America, the evolution and the generational evolution of slavery in America. The difference between the main difference I found between the Civil War and World War II is that slavery was indoctrinated in the mindset. The incarceration of the Jews and the other people who were incarcerated in concentration camps was just a small fraction of the time that that the Black people were incarcerated. Yet I really do believe that the mindset's still the same. If we believe that someone is less than us, it's easier to put them in a category and not think of them as a human being. What was interesting about writing Master Sam was that I had a lot of, I could see him more than I could like hear what he would say. I could see his body language. I could see what he was doing when I was writing this story. And Emerald has the same kind of observation of him. She'll watch Master Sam and say, he looks like this, or he acts like this, or whatever. Through her eyes, we know he is an alcoholic, that he drinks excessively. And I know as an adult, it's to cover up his shame and guilt over selling Emerald's father in the first chapter. And then as the story evolves, we just watch him interact with her and with the other slaves in ways that we realize that he does see them as human beings, but he doesn't know how to get out of the systemic racism and the quote way of life that was generations in the making. His father was what we would consider the typical slave owner who just saw his slaves as property to do whatever he wanted with. There's a scene in there where we see him beating Ruby, Emerald's mother, mercilessly. His wife is complicit in that. But Sam at the time tried to rescue Ruby, and he got beaten for it as well. So we see him as kind of like not necessarily a tragic hero, but as someone who's trying to evolve out of that mindset. And so I knew from the very beginning that he was going to let go of that farm. I knew in my writer's mind that he was going to give that farm to Ruby. But I had no idea that he was her half brother until I got to the part where the barn is set on. He sets the barn on fire and hangs himself. And Emerald sees this happen, goes to get Ruby, and Ruby risks her life to save him. And I knew in that moment when Ruby would go into that barn and risk her own life to save Sam, I knew that they were half brother and sister. And so that's how that story evolved. And that's not unusual. As we all know, Thomas Jefferson had children with his slaves. Many, many, many slave owners raped their slaves and had children by them. There were some slave owners that treated their slaves like family. There were some slave owners that were just, they thought, well, they're just a part of the plantation and this is how it is. There were so many different biographies that I read. So I didn't want to make Sam a sympathetic character necessarily because he was still making choices. His wife is from the North and she wanted him to get out of the South and he chose to stay there, probably out of obligation to his father. But I find that the stories that are told of slavery are as infinite as the stars in the sky. I mean, truly, there are so many different stories. And just like the stories of the Holocaust, each one is meaningful. So I encourage you to continue reading on your own if you're interested. I'll put some links to some resources in the description below. But just to let you know that as the stories are told, there's always more. And so I'm contemplating writing Emerald's sequel because I want to know how she got from the settler plantation to Cleveland, where she is at the end of the story. What happened in between inheriting this property and moving north? And so in that respect, I'm researching the sequel to her story, which I started writing maybe 4 years ago and I stopped, but I think I'm going to pick back up on that again because I just think it's so fascinating as the story of slavery is continuing to evolve in our country. Even now, we're hearing more and more stories, which I think are so valuable. So until I see you again, just contact me below if you would like to purchase copies of The Lace Makers. I'm happy to give discounts to teachers and to book clubs. You can find the book in paperback and digital form on Amazon. Please like and share this video if it interests you. And if you have any questions for me, just put them in the comments below. I'd be happy to answer them for you in future videos. Have a great day.